Good afternoon. I can see we have some people that have joined. Okay, good afternoon. I think we can begin as we wait for Dr. Dutton to join. Um, we have Madam Anne who's available, who's going to start her presentation. She's ready to present this session. This session is organization culture, transformation, and alignment of HR practices. The interface between HR and OD. So I think, Madam Anne, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anne Kabianga, and it's really fantastic to be here. Today, I just want to talk a little bit about organization culture, but I start by introducing myself. The things that are important to me are integrity, authenticity, and growth. In the last months of COVID, I've also started to find gratitude to become a very important value to me. So that is who I am, and that is what most of my decisions and my life is based on. In terms of work, I'm an organization culture and change management specialist, and I work in many different areas of organization culture and change. My real passion is around youth at work and enabling the next generation of Africans to be a world-class African workforce without compromising our African identity. In terms of the people that I've worked with, these are some of the clients that I have worked with in the recent past. And the reason why I'd like to show it to you, because it's the stuff that I'll be sharing today is based on the lessons that I have learned while working on these different organizations. So the conversation today is around organization culture, and I really want to speak about using organization culture as a moat for strategy execution. Now, the word moat was popularized by Warren Buffett when he talked about an economic moat, something that protects your competitive advantage and enables you to win in the market. And so I'm using this with the same reference in terms of how can you use your culture to provide the competitive advantage that allows you to attract the talent that you want, to retain the talent that you want, and to drive the results that you want for your organization. And that's therefore the culture moat. And the things that are in the culture moat, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, are our leadership style and how we lead culture, the employee experience, of course, which is a critical element of culture, the organization's purpose, and the internal environment that we create within our organizations through the different structures that we put in place within the organization. So that's really how I see the things that would make your culture become a moat for your strategy execution. So what I'll be sharing is really lessons learned in the course of our work in terms of how culture can become a competitive advantage. So, you know, when it comes to things like culture, really recognizing that every organization has to have a different culture based on the things that they want and the people that they have. I just feel that sharing what we've learned in our experience over the last 10 or so years enables us to not only just provide some relevance, but for people to start to think, how can I apply this to my own organization? Because it will show up differently. So the first thing we've learned is that organizations that have successful cultures, you know, cultures that enable them to achieve their strategic goals, are values-driven organizations. And this means that the organization makes all the decisions they make based on the values that they have as an organization. And let me just illustrate that. So we see 4 different key areas of alignment that are required. And these key areas are around strategy in terms of just vision, mission, and what you experience in terms of how the kind of values you need to embody to be able to deliver that mission and purpose. The brand in terms of how you show up in the market and the identity and personality of your organization, the people that you have recruited or that you have within your organization, and the results that you seek to achieve in the market. If we go back to strategy, I think one of the things that we have identified as really important, and a basic assumption that we make, is that the organizations that we work with are conscious organizations. They're organizations that seek not only to deliver results to their shareholders, but also seek to achieve common good for their employees, common good for their customers, and common good for the communities from which they draw these incomes. So that's how we like to view the strategy of the organization, or the purpose of the organization, one that is enabling that organization to add value to those four different stakeholders. And what we look at is, what are the values that these organizations need to embody to be able to deliver value for those different stakeholders. And then we have the brand, in terms of how are you showing up, how are you being experienced, what are those values. We look at your people, what's important to them, and what are their values. And then finally, the results, and what do your results demonstrate as your values. And so what we've learned is that organizations that have a good culture that enables strategy execution have aligned values across those four areas. And we've seen that as a result, what happens is that you end up developing stakeholder trust, because what you're doing in all those four areas is aligned. So you're being consistent. It enables you to optimize the resources that you have, whether it's your people or your finances or whatever other, your infrastructure, whatever other resources you have, you're able to optimize them because you're going in the same direction. You're not moving all over the place. And finally, it becomes sustainable because it becomes a rhythm, and so you're able to follow it, and your culture starts to develop organically, and it starts to align organically going forward. So we found that is a really that really helps organizations that have a culture that enables strategy execution, have aligned values in these four areas. One of the other things that we've learned is that purpose is everything. Not just the organization's intent, but also the purpose of the individuals. And we've understood that when people are clear about what they want, or where they want to go, and what their picture of success looks like, why do I exist and why am I doing this? When people are clear about that, then intrinsic motivation becomes, just the norm, and focus and resilience becomes the norm. And we find that people who are more clear about the purpose of the organization and how it connects to their personal purpose become much better in terms of living the culture of the organization and motivating themselves and staying focused and being resilient when in times of trouble like COVID times. So that's one of the things that we've learned. Purpose is everything, not just organizational purpose, but personal purpose. And so with the organizations that we work with, we spend a lot of time saying we need to make sure that your onboarding process is also focused on making sure that this alignment exists between personal purpose and organizational purpose. The other thing we've learned is that when you talk about culture, we see a lot of organizations that are trying different things and different initiatives based on what they've seen or what they've heard, sort of an attitude of why not put sleeping pods in the sales office, but what we've experienced is that actually we need to be purposeful about the way we design our culture and the initiatives and structures that we create around culture. And it is much more powerful to do this from a values-based position. So what are we trying to achieve with our culture? What's our culture picture of success? What's our blueprint? And what values come through in this culture? So we found that to be really important. So we found purposeful structures, initiatives, and activities must happen, and we must really resist the urge to basically throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. Just let's try that. That attitude doesn't work at all. So we're encouraging people to be very deliberate about the initiatives and the structures and the activities they build, even as simple as when building a team building activity. Think about it and make sure that it resonates with the purpose of your culture and the blueprint that you have. So basically, just in terms of an African proverb that reminds us of this, is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. The next thing that I'd like to share that I've learned working on culture is something that was brought to me by one of my clients and someone I really respect, a very conscious leader. And basically, it was, do we, and he was the vice president of Danone at the time and is now chief executive. And he said, do we want to build a Danone in Africa, or do we want to build an African Danone? And that distinction for me at that time didn't really stick. But then, with time, I've really begun to understand that this is really, really important for us. We must start to think about, how do we build a culture that resonates not just with the brand, but also with our own cultural context and our cultural identity. Marketing teams are really good at this. And of course, in the pictures I've put Coca-Cola there. But just in terms of being able to study a market and a people and begin to think, how do we apply our world-class practices to this local context? And so this has become something that's really important for us in terms of driving culture. How do we create world-class organizations that are African organizations and not just international organizations in Africa? So creating a sense of ownership and customization and adaptation to our local context. So we found that organizations that are able to do this have a very heightened self-awareness, a sense of self-awareness. They're very clear about who they are, why they exist, and what they're trying to achieve. And I think we must do the same internally for our culture. We must be very clear about who we are, what we're trying to achieve, and who we're trying to achieve it with in terms of our employees. The other thing, we found that, we have many different local contexts. It requires a lot more work, but adaptation to local context really helps in terms of building a culture that delivers strategy execution or catalyzes strategy execution, for that matter. A culture that respects the values, the needs of the local population is really, really important. And most importantly, a world-class African workplace, because with globalization and all the things we're beginning to see happening around the world today, we can't afford to build a culture that, where I think I heard someone talk about it earlier, in terms of, saying African time, for example. That's not a world-class African workplace. We must take world-class practices and bring them into our workplace without compromising our African identity. And we found that this is really, really important in terms of developing culture, because it removes the dissonance that employees feel when they have to be someone different when they come to work. We want them to be able to feel like, I can be the same person I am. I can be authentically African in my workplace without causing myself to be an outcast or to not fit in. So for me, it's so important that we stop just shouting, we're African, Africa's got the best work, the youth population, Africa's got that great skills and so on. We must actually start to bring this to life within our cultures, within our workplace cultures. What else have we learned? We've learned everyone matters, and inclusivity needs to be at the heart of culture that enables or catalyzes strategy execution, making sure that everybody within the organization is involved. So, I'll tell you two stories that really bring this to life for me. One of them was a manufacturing organization that I was working with. That was one of the symptoms of their culture was that they really had customers queuing, actually sometimes for days to get loaded, for product to get loaded. And they just couldn't seem to solve it, no matter how many tills they open. And so one time we were having a conversation, and then these two young guys say, yeah, one time over lunch we had a discussion and we thought about how we can solve this problem. And we thought we could do this and we could do this. And everybody in the room said, but why didn't you tell us? And they said, well, we're not in management meetings. We just thought about it. We figured it out, but, we had nobody to tell. So we never said anything. But, that characterizes a lot of our organizations, not creating enough voice channels for employees to give their input. And we found that is really important in creating cultures that enable strategy execution. The other one is around a new drive-through that was built recently in Nairobi. And one of the things that happened is that everybody in every one of the windows, the person who you give the order, the person where you pay, the place where you collect your order, and the guy who opens the gate, all those guys are really nice people as individuals. They're great service and everything, but the place hasn't been designed with the kind of cars that the customers have in mind. So you keep, it's very narrow. They built very narrow drive-throughs, and so people have to keep reversing and turning, and it becomes such an uncomfortable experience. I'm sure that there are people in those windows who are watching people and wondering, I wonder why that person is reversing, or I wonder why they're not able to go through, but they haven't really had the conversation and nothing's been done about it. Even if they had the conversation at a local point, it's probably never been anywhere beyond their particular situation for someone to be able to do it. So once again, it's really important. We found that it's really important that every job is everybody's job. There's nothing that is, private or secret. People must know what they do and how that's important to delivering the mission, but also what does everybody else who is here do? What results are expected from them, and how do we know we are succeeding? So everybody matters. Every job is everybody's job, from the bottom to the top. Strategy cascades and performance dashboards must take into account all employees, so that they are simple and easy to understand, visible and transparent, so that everybody is able to see how the organization is doing. When we structure communication, we must structure it once again so that it's simple, it's transparent, but it's also consistent, so that the messages coming, whether it's in departmental meetings or town halls, must be consistent, must be the same message coming through over and over again. And simplicity is really important, because that message must be understood by everybody within the organization. We've also found that, and especially in COVID times, that it's really important for us to think about developing our employees at all levels. So self-leadership for every single employee, irrespective of what they do, is really important. We found that these are the things that really enable us to build culture that catalyzes execution. So everybody has to work. It's not just about being a manager or being having a job description. It's also about actually just applying self-application from everyone in order for the organization to work. As far as communication is concerned, that's my favorite proverb. You really, really have to, be conscious and think about communication, not from what you're saying, but from what other people are hearing, because it is important for them to know the progress that you're making. And this is particularly relevant in these times when people are working remotely, to all constantly remember to make sure that people know how we're doing, what's going on and so on. And we found when we did earlier this year, when we did an assessment around how people were experiencing culture during COVID, that one of the biggest things was that feeling of exclusion, of not being part of the decisions that were being made, of not knowing where the organization was going. And it was really eroding organizational trust upon which good culture is built. So making culture your moat, good culture will really sharpen your social capability to execute strategy. So it allows you to utilize a greater part of your workforce to be able to deliver the results that you want. Of course, based on the assumption that you have designed your organization right and all the other things are in place. But good culture will also help you attract the kind of talent that you want. Once again, this is something that COVID has done for us. It has made people a lot more aware about places and wanting them to work in places where they feel they can add value. So attracting the right talent is more critical than ever, because not everyone will come to you like they would before just because it's a job. Now people are more clear about wanting to add value and working in places where there's balance and care and a lot more humanness than before. Great culture, of course, will help you retain people. People want to work in places where they feel valued, where they feel that they can add value, where they are part of the conversation and part of the decision making. Great culture helps you with your advocacy, enabling your employees to speak about your organization to others, creating new customers. We've been working in organizations where their employees weren't even using their products, let alone telling other people about it. Not because they were bad employees, but because the culture was not inclusive. They weren't involved in decision making, and they thought of their job just as a job, and it wasn't really linked to what they wanted to do as individuals. So that lack of alignment causes people not to give you enough advocacy. Discretionary effort, once again, just something that every organization needs, people bringing themselves to work and applying themselves every day, not just when they're being supervised, but because they believe in what you're trying to do and they can see how they're contributing and they can see what results are going to come out of their contribution. And finally, just passion, coming to work and basically trying to achieve the best that you can achieve every day at work without, and once again, passion, of course, leads to things like resilience and causes people to be much more focused in their work. So those are just some of the things we've learned around how to make culture your competitive advantage and make sure that you have your people sticking together and focusing and driving the organization towards achieving your strategy. That's my presentation. I don't know, can I take questions now or shall we? And then take questions?
Hi, Anne.
Hi.
Let me just wait for Eddie connected, but I don't know why. Okay, he's still there. Okay, great. I think we'll do questions at the end. Let's just
Okay.
allow Eddie to present. And those who have questions can actually drop them in the question and answer session so that we can do them at the end. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'll now ask Eddie to share your screen. Okay, as we wait for that, Anne, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, just maybe highlight on the role of the HR in fostering a high performance culture in an organization.
The role of HR.
Yes, the role of HR.
I think that okay. So in my view, working on culture is really the job of all the leaders in the organization. So everybody in Exco is a critical part of making sure that culture, the organization lives and breathes the right culture. And I feel that the role of HR is really in terms of that particular piece on employee experience, which is quite a critical piece. That particular piece, I feel, is where HR could really bring their skill to the fore in terms of making sure that the employee experience resonates with, or brings together not just what the organization values, but what the employees value as well. And creating an employee experience that enables people to be the best that they can be without necessarily changing who they are, if you know what I mean. So it's
Yes.
less about compliance and more about alignment.
Okay.
That's what I feel HR could do in terms of making sure that the right culture lives within the organization. But ultimately, it is the role of every leader to make sure that their teams are living the values, because they're actually these values are things that we're doing. It's about every decision that we make within the organization at every single point. It's not, about team building activities and whatever. It's about every single decision that is made being anchored on a set of beliefs and a set of values. I think Eddie's ready now.
Okay. Awesome. That's awesome. Great. That's great. Thank you so much. I think okay. Please share Eddie's screen. I think he's unable to share on his own. Participants, please feel free to ask questions under the discuss icon. When you click there, there's a section for questions and answers. Please just feel free to ask a question so that I can read it out for you and you get the feedback. Okay, I can see Dr. Dotun is connecting.
Okay. Sorry, I've been struggling to get through. Sorry.
Hello?
My laptop is not connecting. I don't know why it's not connecting. It's struggling to connect.
Okay, it's okay. You can just go ahead and share what you have on your slides.
Okay. Okay.
We can just follow you through without you sharing your slides if you're having challenges.
I would like to share so that I can connect. It gives me a kind of psychological disconnect if I'm not able to share.
Okay. So we give you some more time.
Okay, now, okay, I will go to.
You go to present
I can't
on your
see.
right hand side. There's an icon that's marked present. You click on it and then it will give you share screen. Then you'll be able to share your screen.
Am I right? No, this is not this one. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, Eddie, you're welcome to this session. Please go ahead and share your screen.
Dr. Eddie, can you hear me? Actually, you have put yourself on mute. Can you please unmute yourself so that we can hear you? From the top right hand side of your screen, you can unmute yourself. Dr. Eddie, can you hear me? Dr. Eddie, can you hear me? Eddie, okay. You are on mute. Can you please unmute yourself from top right hand side of your screen? Can you see a microphone option? Can you just unmute yourself from there? Perfect. Can you now try speaking? Ed, we are still not able to hear you. Ed, I would just request you if you can reboot your page once. Just click on the troubleshoot option on the top right hand side of your screen. Just click there and reboot your page once. Ed, I guess your internet connectivity is not that great. I would just request if you can reboot your page once. Eddie, can you please come backstage? I'll sort it out for you. In the meantime, we have Dr. Dotun with us. Can we just have his presentation now? Dr. Dotun, are you there?
Dr. Ann, are you there? Okay. Maybe you can just take us through on how an organization can actually sustain a good culture.
That's a very broad question. But I think that
Yeah, just try and summarize it as we wait for Dr. Eddie to just share his PowerPoint.
so in my experience, the one way in which I have seen organizations that are able to sustain a good culture, and to be quite honest, your culture is never perfect, but it's always a work in progress as you bring in new people, as you experience new challenges. But what I've seen to really be effective and important has been organizations that are constantly building their self-awareness, constantly looking at themselves and asking themselves, how are we doing? Now, in the course of our work, one of the things that we do is we try and create culture dashboards that are linked to business results. And I found this to be really, really effective in terms of getting people to know where to look in terms of to find out where their culture is going wrong. So our dashboards incorporate different measures, but the questions we ask ourselves is, if an organization loses, for example, its sense of integrity, what would start to happen? Sometimes you find that it becomes customer complaints or customer attrition, and so we use that as a measure of whether your culture is right or wrong. So creating those dashboards gives you the opportunity to be able to constantly check in with your culture from a business perspective. How is our culture impacting our business results? And it makes a great case for change for not just for leaders, but generally for all the employees, especially if they're completely connected to your purpose. So that's sense of awareness has been one of the things. And alongside that, it's what I was talking about before when we say purpose is everything. How are you building structures and initiatives and processes that are founded on the values of your organization? I can see Eddie's back, so I'll hand over to him.
Okay. Great. Welcome, Eddie. Perfect. We can see it now, Eddie.
All right, great. Guys, My apologies for the technological hiccups. This is as frustrating as it is for me as it is for you. I apologize. I'm going to go straight ahead then. All right. So my name is Eddie Boetis. I am from an organization called Leadership. Basically, what we do is we help leaders to build a focused and adaptive organizational culture. I'm based out of Cape Town in South Africa, and have been helping organizations for the last 25 years to build a focused and adaptive organizational culture. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking about the role of leadership in driving organizational culture. And the outcome that I'd like to, or what I'd like to have happen inside of your heads perhaps this afternoon, is to provide you with a couple of key actionable skills to improve the culture in your teams. All right, I'm going to start off by sharing a quick story. When the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts. So my question this afternoon is, why do some groups add up to be greater than the sum of their parts, while others add up to be less? This is a question that I've been fascinated with for many, many years. In fact, for a couple of decades. So what I want you to do is in your head this afternoon, I want you to imagine the following scenario. In front of you, I want you to imagine that you have 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti. You've got a meter of transparent tape. You have a meter of string, and you have one normal-sized marshmallow. So that's uncooked spaghetti, a meter of transparent string, a meter of, or transparent tape rather, a meter of string, and a normal-sized marshmallow. So your challenge as a team. So I want you to imagine your leadership team in your organization. You've got those ingredients in front of you, and the objective is for your team to build the tallest structure possible. And there's only one rule, and that is that the marshmallow has to be placed on top of this tower that you're trying to build. So my question is, how do you think your team would do on this challenge? If you thought about your current leadership team in your organization, how do you think you guys would do? So the reality is that this challenge has been done, hundreds and hundreds of times over the last probably decade. And it's been done with groups of CEOs, it's been done with groups of lawyers, with business students, and even kindergarten kids. So these are kids that are sort of 6 years old, under the age of 6 years old. And so if your team is anything like the business students or the CEOs, what would typically happen is that you would get straight to work. You would examine the materials and you would start thinking strategically. You would start asking savvy questions, and you would probably start throwing around some very good ideas as a team. And it would be professional, it would be rational, and it would be intelligent. Just think about your particular team. What would more than likely then happen is that you would decide on a particular strategy, and then you would start building your tower as a team. Now, what's typically happened in these experiments is that the group of kindergartners take a very different approach. So what happens with the kindergartners is that there is no strategy at all. They don't analyze, they don't share experiences, they don't ask questions. They don't propose any options, they don't share any ideas, and that they don't talk a whole lot amongst themselves as a group at all. They stand very close to each other. They stand shoulder to shoulder. They are not very organized. They grab materials from each other, and they just start building. Their whole approach could be summed up as really just trying out a bunch of stuff together. So it's very different to what your team would do. It's also very different to what a group of CEOs or what a group of business students would do. So the question that I'd like to ask is, if you had to bet money on which of those teams you think would build the tallest structure or to build the tallest tower, who would you bet money on? I'm pretty sure that you would bet that your team would possess, with the skills, the intelligence, and the experience, you would think that your team would do a better job than the kindergartners. So the way we normally, think about group performance is that we automatically think that a team of skilled individuals, will combine to produce a skilled performance in the same way that 2 plus 2, will combine to equal 4. And so in your head, you're probably thinking that the business students, you're probably thinking that your team would combine collectively and do a better job than the kindergarten kids. But here's the thing. Your bet would probably almost be certainly dead wrong, because this experiment has been done over hundreds and hundreds of times. And what happens is that in the trials, the kindergartners on average build structures or build towers that are on average 26 inches tall. Our business school students, on the other hand, or groups of CEOs, typically build structures that are 10.5 inches high. So that's less, that's almost a third of the height that the kindergartners produce. So it's very difficult to try and absorb this kind of result, isn't it? It's difficult to imagine how a group of smart, experienced business school students can combine to produce such a poor performance. While unsophisticated, inexperienced kindergarten children combine to produce a successful performance. Our instincts in this case cause us to focus on the wrong thing, though. Because typically what we do when we look at groups is we look at the individuals within a group, and we think that individual skills, should combine to produce group excellence. But it's not what happens at all. And it's really not what matters at all, because, interaction in those teams is really what happens. So the business school students typically, they appear to be collaborative, they appear to be collaborating, but what they're really engaging in is a process that psychologists call status management. So what they're really thinking is that, they are trying to figure out how they fit into the group. They're asking themselves questions like, who is in charge? Is it okay to criticize somebody? Is it okay to criticize somebody else's idea? They're asking themselves questions like, so it may appear that their interactions are smooth, but the underlying behavior demonstrated by the business school students are riddled with inefficiency, hesitation, and subtle competition. So instead of focusing on the task, what they tend to be focusing on is that they tend to focus on navigating their uncertainty about one another. So they spend too much time, managing status. They spend too much time, trying to figure out how they fit into this, to this group. And so what happens is they fail to grasp the essence of the problem. And that really is that the marshmallow is relatively heavy and the spaghetti is relatively hard to secure. And so what tends to happen is that after their first attempts result in collapse, and then they often run out of time. The kindergartners, though, they're disorganized, but they are not competing, for status. So what happens is they stand shoulder to shoulder, they work energetically together, they move quickly, they experiment, they take risks, they notice the different outcomes which guides them to effective solutions. They succeed not because they are smarter, but because they work together in a smarter way. So the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts in this particular case. So today I want to talk about, what is it that creates great groups? Why is it that some teams combine to produce greater results than other teams? And there really are there are really three skills that I would like to share with you this afternoon that leaders can immediately start to implement in their teams to provide results that are greater than the sum of the individual parts. And the first one is that they create a sense of belonging. So what they do is they build for psychological safety. So what does this mean? Listen to some of the quotes from some of the people that are part of some of the best teams in the world. So this is from U.S. Navy team Teal 6. One of the members of the team explains it this way. He says, "I can't explain it, but things just feel right. I've actually tried to quit a couple of times, but I keep coming back to it. There is no feeling like it. These guys are my brothers." Here's another quote from KIPP charter schools, who are consistently ranked as some of the best performing schools in the world when they are compared to other international schools anywhere in the world. One of the team members says, "It's not rational. Nobody who's purely rational about it does the kind of things that happen here. There's a teamwork that goes way beyond team and overlaps into the rest of people's lives." And this is another quote from IDEO Design. But basically, what one of the team members there is saying is we are all about being a familial group, because it allows you to take more risks, give each other permission, and have moments of vulnerability that you would never have in a normal setting. So if you listen to the quotes of these individuals that work in some of the best research teams, and when I say best research teams, these are teams that have consistently over the last decade performed in the top 1 percentile of their industries or in their domain of expertise. And what it's all about in terms of creating a sense of belonging is that it's all about belonging cues. So as human beings, what's happening is that we are consistently asking the age-old question that glows in our brains. Are we safe here? What's our future with these people? Are there dangers lurking? When you receive a belonging cue, so a belonging cue is something that goes deep within our own psychology as human beings and gives us that feeling of psychological safety. But what happens when we receive a belonging cue is that the amygdala, switches roles and starts to use its immense unconscious neural horsepower to build and sustain your social bonds. So what happens is it tracks members of your group, it tunes into their interactions, and it sets the stage for meaningful engagement. So in a heartbeat, what happens when we receive a belonging cue in our minds is that our amygdala, transforms from a growling guard dog into an energetic guide dog with a single-minded goal, which is to make sure that you stay tightly connected with your people, with your group. So on brain scans, this moment is vivid and unmistakable as the amygdala lights up in an entirely different way. So Jay Van Bavel, who is a world-renowned social neuroscientist, says the whole thing flips. He says the moment that you're part of a group, the amygdala tunes in to who's in that group and starts intensely tracking them. And, because these people are valuable to you, they were strangers, before, but now they're on your team. You feel a sense of belonging. You feel that these are your people. And he says that changes the whole dynamic. And it's a very, very powerful switch that takes place. It's a big top-down change. It's a total, reconfiguration of the entire motivational and decision-making system that exists within our brains as human beings. And so basically, what do belonging cues look like? They basically contain, 3 basic qualities. Number one is that there is a sense of energy. Is that when people or when leaders demonstrate belonging cues, they invest in the exchange that is occurring with another human being. There's an energy that is present. You are present. And what happens is the second quality is that there is a sense of individualization. They treat the person as unique and as valued. What also happens is that individuals that receive belonging cues receive a message that there is a future relationship that will take place. In other words, there is future orientation. It is a signal that this relationship will continue. So basically what happens is the key message that people in your team need to receive subconsciously are, number one, that you are part of this group. Number two, that this group is special and that we have high standards here. And number three, that I believe that you can reach those standards. So what we need to be doing is to create an environment where people feel this psychological safety where they feel a sense of belonging, that they are literally part of this tight-knit group that has been created. So some ideas for leaders. In other words, what are some of the things that you can do as a leader right now to create belonging cues, or to create a sense of belonging, a sense of safety within your teams? The first one is to over-communicate your listening. So resist the need to interrupt, because what happens is interruptions shatter the smooth interactions at the core of belonging. Research shows that the best salespeople in the world very rarely interrupt people. The numbers show that very clearly. So what they do is they allow the other person to speak, and they very rarely interrupt. So there's a difference between excited interruption that takes place when people are, brimming with creative ideas and they're sharing things. But when it comes to making people feel like they belong, it's very important that we over-communicate our listening and that we don't interrupt. Let the other person speak more than we do. And the second one is to create a sense of future connection. Help them to feel that there is a long-term relationship that's going to take place here. The St. Louis Cardinals, are renowned for their culture of developing young players in the big league, of baseball. And there's a there's a brilliant story of a group of players that were on a Johnson City, Tennessee Cardinals team. So what they were doing is they were on a bus and they were on their way to play their game. So the Johnson City, Tennessee Cardinals are the lower ranked team that are the feeders for the St. Louis Cardinals. And there's a story where they were all sitting on a bus one day and the head coach was watching the senior team playing. They were all watching the senior team playing on a television screen on the bus. And what the head coach did is he said to everybody on the bus, he said, "Do you see that player there?" And he pointed to the player that was on the screen. It was Trevor Rosenthal, who was a World Series pitcher. And was one of the best pitchers in the world. But basically what he said was 3 years ago, he was sitting in that very seat that you are sitting in right now. Isn't that incredible? So basically what he did is that, and that's all that he said, is he basically created a future connection. And he said that you are part of a winning team. You are part of a team that develops its players, and that you have a future relationship here. And that future relationship will result in your greatness, as part of this team. There's also a great story of Lionel Messi, who's been with Barcelona for decades and decades, ever since he was 13 years old. And when he was interviewed recently, he was asked the question, why is it that he stayed so long with Barcelona? And he said it's very simple, because when he joined Barcelona at the age of 13, they were the only team that were willing to pay for his growth hormone treatment that he needed at the age of 13. Isn't that an incredible story? So one single little thing, where a coach or where a team, create a sense of future connection, and it results in people sticking to that team for decades and decades. The third thing that I'd like to chat about as a key idea for leaders is that you cannot say thank you enough. In a study by Wharton Professor Andy Grant, subjects were asked to help a fictitious student named Eric to write a cover letter for a job application. And what happened was that half of the participants afterwards received a thankful, thoughtful response from Eric, and half received a neutral response. And this is what happened afterwards, because when they were asked to then afterwards help, they were asked by another fictitious student, Steve, for some help. Those who received a heartfelt thanks from Eric earlier were twice as likely to offer help than those who received a neutral response. So when we say thank you, and we say it again over and over and over again, thank you is a powerful cue for safety, for connection, and for motivation. So as a leader, make sure that you thank your staff regularly for the work that they do. Some of the best coaches in the world, in fact, the coach of the St. Louis Cardinals, made it a habit that when he was one-on-one with his team, he thanked them for the privilege of being their coach. And it sent a very powerful cue of belonging to the team members, that they were part of something that is great. Another great thing that we can start to do right now, and I think Anne, touched on it earlier in her brilliant presentation, was take great care to hire for culture fit. And I want to talk to you about the Zappos story. Now, Zappos are an organization that were recently, or a number of years ago, bought out by Amazon. They have the highest net promoter score in the world. In other words, they have the greatest customer-centric culture in the world. They are known more for their culture of customer centricity than they are for what they do, which is selling shoes online. So what happens at Zappos is that before you can get a job at Zappos, what they do is, and actually I'll tell you, a little bit of a story later on with about Zappos, a little bit later on. But if you're going to join Zappos, they go through a rigorous hiring process first of all, and then what happens is once you are selected, which is very rigorous process, as I said, you spend 5 weeks training. And in that training process, what you do is you go through every single department, and no matter what your seniority in the organization is, you spend a number of days on the phone talking to customers in the call center so that you get an idea for what the business is all about. But during that training process, what happens is that people are offered $2,000 to quit the organization. So basically what they're saying is that you've been here a couple of weeks now. During your orientation process, you understand a little bit about what our culture is. If you don't feel that you are a right culture fit for our organization, we will offer you $2,000 to leave. And here's the interesting statistic, is that only 10% of people take it because they really feel a sense of belonging. They feel like they are really part of that team. The other thing that they do is they have what they call the arsehole test, is what they call it. So most of the individuals that come to work at Zappos in Arizona come from out of town, and they arrive at the airport and they are picked up by a cab driver that is hired by Zappos. And the Zappos cab driver is there as part of the interview process because he is there to give them feedback on how they treat people like cab drivers or how they treat people like waiters. So what happens is that the people that are going to work with the new hire in their teams also have a coffee meeting with these individuals to see whether or not they are comfortable with working with this individual. Some of the best teams in the world, feel a sense of belonging when they are part of the culture hire process because they feel like they are part of hiring the person that they will work with in the future. And the last thing that I'd like to chat about in terms of creating belonging cues is make sure that everyone has a voice. Pixar call it, they have all-inclusive morning meetings where everybody in their team has the opportunity to offer feedback and to receive input on recently received footage. As you know, Pixar were recently amalgamated with Disney, and they make some of the greatest animated movies on the planet. This is a very creative industry where it requires input from everybody, and what they do in their culture is they make sure that every single individual has a voice, that they are heard, that they feel part of the team by feeling that they can voice, their ideas. Okay, so that's key idea number one, which is to create a sense of belonging. The second very key important idea that leaders can start to work on right now is that of sharing vulnerability. And I'd like you to tell you a quick story. It was United Airlines flight 232 from Denver to Chicago, where there was 235 passengers on board. So the weather was warm and mild. This was in 1993. For the first hour and 10 minutes, everything was perfect. Captain Al Haynes was in charge, and he had an amiable manner, and was liked by his crew. He was liked by his team. He was 2 years from retirement, and he was planning on spending, the rest of his life, driving an RV around the country with his wife Darlene. And then, what happened was at 3:16, a loud explosion came from the tail end of the plane. The plane shook fiercely. They started climbing and tilting hard to the right. And Bill Records, who was the first officer, then grabbed one of the two control wheels known as the yoke and said, "I have the plane." The crew then realized that the tail engine, which was one of three engines on this particular plane, which is a DC, was gone. And meanwhile, what happened was the plane started, tilting further to the right, despite the first officer's best efforts to correct it. He tried to keep his voice calm as he said, "I can't control the plane." And what happened was that the captain grabbed the yoke and pulled with all his strength, and he said, "I've got it." The problem was, though, is that he didn't have it. The controls didn't budge. The plane kept tilting to the right, and it felt like it was nearly standing on its wing. They later found out that the explosion had sliced the hydraulic control lines through which the pilots operated the rudder, the ailerons, and the wing flaps. They had no control whatsoever. It was then, it was what the aviation board called a catastrophic, failure, because it usually is fatal. So the captain managed to stop the roll by using the throttles to increase the power to the right wing and to decrease the power to the left-hand wing. And what happened was the asymmetric thrust helped the plane to slowly tilt back to a rough semblance of level flight. But it really didn't do anything to sort out the bigger picture, which was that they didn't have any control over the airplane. The plane was now wobbling through the skies like a poorly made paper airplane. And it was, porpoising up and down thousands of feet at a time, each minute. The captain and the first officer, continued to wrestle with the yokes. Now, in one of the aisles of a seat in first class, a 46-year-old man named Denny Fitch was cleaning up coffee that had spilled on his lap when the explosion hit. And Denny Fitch worked for United Airlines as a pilot trainer. So what he did was he spent his days in a flight simulator training other pilots on how to handle emergencies. He realized something was wrong, that he could hear the explosion. So what he did was he spoke to the air hostess, and he asked her to inform the captain of his willingness to help. The word came back from the cockpit, send him up. He walked down the aisle and he opened the cockpit door, and his heart literally stopped. It dropped. He later told reporters that the scene, was something, quite unbelievable, because he saw both of the pilots in short-sleeved shirts. The tendons were raised on their forearms and their knuckles were white. He said that the first thing that struck his mind was, "Dear God, I'm going to die this afternoon." And, looking at the gauges, he was trying to figure out, what was going on. And he couldn't figure it out at all because he had never seen a total hydraulic failure in an airplane before. And then he said 6 words. He said, "Tell me what you want and I'll help you." And the captain gestured towards the engine throttles that were located, between the 2 pilots. So what he did is he put himself between the 2 pilots on his knees, and he grabbed the yokes because what happened was that somebody needed to run the throttles because the 2 pilots were wrestling with the controls, the steering controls or the yokes. And he moved forward, he knelt between the seats, and he grabbed the throttles with both of his hands. And shoulder to shoulder, the 3 of them began to do something that no pilots had ever done before. And that is that they flew a DC-10 without any controls. So let's analyze this story. And there's a very powerful story here of where a leader in a position of authority and in a position of power shares a moment of vulnerability which literally changes everything that happens on that plane from that minute forward. So it's what's called the vulnerability loop. So what happens in a moment of vulnerability is that, and in the vulnerability loop is that the first person sends out a signal that they are fallible, that they are vulnerable, that they have weaknesses. So they send out a signal of vulnerability. And what then happens is that the second person, detects that signal of vulnerability, and they respond by signaling their own vulnerability or their own fallibility or their own weakness as a human being. And then what happens is, the first person sees that signal in the person that they have demonstrated vulnerability. And what happens is something really miraculous, because a norm is established where closeness and trust increase. So let's go back to the story. So consider the situation of Haynes on the flight. He's the captain. He's the source of authority. He's the source of power. So when the explosion knocks out the controls, he grabs the yoke and he says, "I've got it." In other words, he, as a leader, thinks that he has to exercise control, thinks that as a leader he needs to give a message that he's got everything sorted out, that he's in control. He said later that those 3 words were the dumbest words of his life. He said, had he continued to act in that manner and to give them the impression that he had everything under control, he says they would likely have crashed. But he didn't carry on in that manner. What he did was he did something even more difficult, and he sent out a signal of vulnerability. He sent out a communication to the rest of the crew that he needed them. And it took just 4 words, because moments before, Denny Fitch, who was the individual who was responsible for training other pilots in emergency procedures, moments before that, what the captain said was, "Does anybody have any ideas?" In other words, his message was, "I don't know what to do here. I am fallible and I need your help." And likewise, when the pilot trainer, Denny Fitch, entered the cockpit, what he could have done is he could have attempted to issue commands to take control, because he knew as much, if not more, than the 2 pilots that were in the cockpit, because he literally did that for a living every single day. He sat on flight simulators and he trained other pilots on emergency procedures. This is what he did every single day of his life. He did the exact opposite though. He put himself beneath the crew, and his words were, "Tell me what you want and I'll help you." So the captain's first words were, "Does anybody have any ideas?" And then Denny Fitch's later words, "Tell me what you want and I'll help you." These 2 sentences sparked a level of collaboration that got them all safely back. Because when as leaders we demonstrate vulnerability, we deliver signals to other individuals that we need help, and it creates a sense of trust. It creates a sense of collaboration, and it creates a sense of cooperation and of motivation. And so, what I'd like to share with you really quickly are what are some of the things that you can do as a leader right now to demonstrate vulnerability in your teams and to increase cooperation. Laszlo Bock.
Sorry, Dr. Eddie, you'll have to be finalizing. You are remaining with 5 minutes.
Okay, no problem. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Laszlo Bock at Google says that one of the things that we can do as leaders in order to demonstrate vulnerability is to ask 3 questions. And at Google, every single leader is requested to do this of their staff, a number of different times throughout the year, to sit down one-on-one with their staff members and to say, what is the one thing that I currently do that you would like me to continue to do? What is the one thing that I currently do that you would like me to continue to do? Secondly, what is the one thing that I don't currently do frequently enough that you think I should do more often? And then thirdly, what can I do to make you more effective? In other words, you're putting yourself in a position of vulnerability where your basic message is, how can I help? My role here is to help you to become more effective. What can I do to help you to succeed? Right, what can we do as leaders right now? What are some of the things that we can do to demonstrate vulnerability? If there is negative stuff, do that in person. Avoid any negative stuff electronically. Do it in person. Joe Madden, who is coach of the Chicago Cubs, does it better than anybody else that I know. He has a glass bowl with pieces of paper in it, and on those pieces of paper are written the bottles of expensive wine. And so what happens is, if a member of the team violates a team rule, what they do is they've got to draw a slip of paper from the bottle, from the bowl rather, and they've got to buy that bottle of wine that's listed on that piece of paper. They've got to then uncork it with their manager. So they've got to sit down one-on-one with their manager. And so what he does is the coach links the act of discipline with the act of connection, which I think is incredibly, incredibly powerful, because you're delivering negative stuff in person, and you're doing it by connecting with the other individual on a real human level. Step number 2 is listen more than you give advice. I think we've spoken about this before. Use flash mentoring. What do you mean by flash mentoring? Like is normal mentoring, but instead of lasting for months or even years or even weeks, do it for a couple of hours, because it establishes real connection with somebody and it builds relationships very quickly. Another thing that you can do is to let the team figure out things for yourself. Some of the best coaches in the world, during a timeout with their teams, will usually meet together in a huddle with their management team, and they will then go and give feedback to their team. But tends to happen sometimes is that the team figure out things for themselves. But a last skill in terms of creating high-performance teams is to build a high-purpose environment. There is a story from Merck Pharmaceuticals. They have one of the best high-purpose environments in the world. Their mission statement literally says to preserve and to improve human life. When George Merck founded the organization, he basically made this statement. He said, we try to remember that medicine is for the patients. It is not for the profit. And he says, the more that we have remembered that, the more profit we have received. So when we build a high-purpose environment, when we work in an environment where we believe that there is a mission that is higher than the work that we are doing, it signals a connection in a team that does more than anything else. So some key ideas that leaders can do right now to create a high-purpose environment is to focus on the wildly important. Research shows that for most leadership teams out there, and it's certainly true with the leadership teams that I've worked in, When I ask the question, what are your top 3 priorities as an organization? I always get different responses from the leadership team. In other words, we are not clear of what the highest priority items in our organization are. And clearly, the lower we go down within an organization, when you start to ask questions like, what is the single, highest priority objective for your organization? Nobody has the ability to connect, what that wildly important goal is. And if we want to create a high purpose environment, we need to be really, really clear, 10 times as clear about what our priorities as an organization, should be. Every single individual in our organization should be laser focused on what our highest priorities as an organization are. And they need to understand what their role is in relation to those highest priority goals. In other words, what do I do that contributes to the highest priority goal? Create and embrace catchphrases. Some of the best teams in the world have catchphrases or a commonality, a language that binds them together, as a team. And the last thing that we can start to do is focus on bar setting behaviors. In the work that I do, I have developed what I call the keystone culture process. So basically what we do is we link the bar setting habits or behaviors, what we call keystone habits. Keystone habits are those habits that have a great impact on every single other behavior in our team. So if you're looking at individuals, a keystone habit, for example, would be waking up early. Because not only does waking up early have a massive impact in other areas of our lives, it sets the trend for how we spend our day and for the success that we achieve in other areas of our lives as well. Another keystone habits for individuals would be, regular exercise, because what happens is research shows that for individuals that exercise regularly, it has a massive impact in their mental health and in other areas of their lives as well. Those individuals who are the most successful individuals on the planet are usually those individuals who have a regular exercise regime. So what we help organizations to do is we try to help them identify what their keystone habits are. In other words, what are the bar setting behaviors? What are the keystone habits that drive your success as an organization? And they've got to be linked to what your highest priorities are as an organization. They've got to be linked to what your purpose is, what you are trying to achieve as an organization, and what your mission is. Why is it that you wake up and get out of bed in the morning? Why was the organization founded? The purpose of business is not to make money. The purpose of business is to live our mission. Money is a natural consequence of our mission lived. Money is a natural consequence of achieving our highest priorities as an organization. All right, so just to recap then, the best teams in the world, the sum is greater than the sum of the individual parts. And that is really because it's not about individual performance or individual skills. It is about collaboration as a team. And there's basically 3 things that we can do right now as leaders, to create, this kind of collaboration within our teams. Step number 1 is to create an environment of safety, to create a sense of belonging within your team. And I demonstrated the belonging cues that we all crave for as human beings, to feel part of a team. The second one is to share vulnerability as leaders. When we share vulnerability, when we show our team members that we don't know everything and we reach out and ask for help, it results in a level of collaboration that ordinary teams do not possess. And the third one is to create a high-purpose environment. We've just spoken about some of the key ideas that we can do to create a high-purpose environment in our organizations. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I really believe that as leaders, if we can start to implement some of these skills, that we can radically transform our teams into teams that equal more than the sum of their individual parts. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for listening, and looking forward to connecting with every single one of you in the future. Are there any questions? Or I guess we'll get to questions a bit later.
Yes, we'll have to ask the questions a little later because we're running out of time. Um, we'll need Dr. Dutton to share his PowerPoint now. Questions will be asked at the end.
Okay, great.
Please,
Thank you for your
participants,
time.
just note down what you have to ask, and we'll ask it at the end so that we can give Dr. Dutton some time to also do his presentation.
All right, thank you guys for the opportunity again. I appreciate it. And we'll wait for Dr. Dotun to get his presentation sorted. In the meantime, you're welcome to think of any questions. I'm sure that Anne, after her fabulous presentation, is very keen to answer a lot of the questions that you have as well.
Please go ahead, Dr. Dutton, and share your slides. Dr. Eddie, you can stop sharing yours. You are welcome. You can just go ahead and introduce yourself. And when you're ready, you can share your slides. Hi.
Hello?
You are quite faint.
Hello?
You need to increase your volume.
Okay, can I go ahead, please?
Yes, you can go ahead. I can hear you clearly now. I'm sure the participants can hear you also. Yes, Doc, you can go ahead. Please go ahead and share your slides.
Hello, can I
You can share your screen.
go ahead?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yes, please, you can go ahead. He seems to have a bad connectivity. Dr. Eddie.
Hello?
Okay. I noticed we had to rush you because we
No
needed him
problem.
to connect. Is there anything that you want to bring out as he reconnects?
Yeah, well, let's have a look. So I think, what I really wanted to achieve this afternoon, and I'm not sure if I was able to do that. I know that, 20 minutes is not a long time at all. But I think, as leaders, we have the greatest responsibility in our organizations to drive organizational culture. And it's very often the unconscious, not necessarily unconscious skills, but it's the unseen skills, the soft skills that make the greatest difference in terms of whether leaders successfully drive organizational culture. We can have the best strategy, we can have the best intentions of we can have the best goals, but it's really the connection that we make as leaders with our teams that will really enable them to feel as if they are really part of a team and that they really belong, and that there's really going to be a sense of collaboration. Organizational culture at the end of the day is more about behavior than it is about anything else. It's about the way we do things around here. And so as leaders, I think we need to establish, bar setting behaviors or bar setting habits within our organization. Part of the Keystone culture process that I have or that I use is where we identify the keystone habits that will drive our success in our organization in relation to the highest priorities. But that's only half the job. It's not enough just to have a number of values on the wall. It's not enough just to have a set of keystone habits on our walls. The real work, for leaders is in habitualizing those behaviors. So a key question then is, how do we go about making those values, making those behaviors, part of the hearts and minds of people, in our teams. And one of the things that we do in our Keystone culture process is we use a process of almost indoctrination of those habits. So we choose, when we work with organizations, we choose one keystone habit a week, and that habit is taught over and over and over again for a period of a week. and then we move on to the next behavior. And then it happens again, over and over again, is that for 1 week, the whole organization focuses on one keystone habit that we would like to become part of the hearts and minds of people within our organization. So we start the day, teaching those behaviors through storytelling, through rituals, and through a number of different things. And it's important that every single individual in the organization gets a voice, that they get an opportunity to teach those keystone habits through experiences that they've seen, that they've had within the organization, through stories. Story is a very, very powerful way to teach. And it's very important that we get staff involved in the teaching process, because the fastest way to learn something is really to teach it. When we change our role from that of learner or passive to teacher, number one, we put ourselves in the position where we need to know what we're talking about. And secondly, we put ourselves in a position where we need to internalize what it is that we're teaching. So I think the best way to internalize habits is to teach them on a regular basis, and for leaders to use those behaviors as coaching opportunities every single day, to catch people in the habit of doing things right, and to highlight it when those habits are seen, when those habits are demonstrated in the organization. Leaders, have a phenomenal role in driving organizational culture. It is our own personal behavior, because what starts to happen is that when we identify those keystone habits or those keystone behaviors, staff will immediately begin to test you on what they can get away with. And the way that they test you is by seeing your behavior as leaders. In my own country, South Africa, there is a level and a magnitude of corruption within our government that exceeds probably a lot of other governments. During this COVID-19 pandemic, billions and billions, literally 500 billion rand has been siphoned out of money that was made available for relief and for PPEs, etc. And the only way that we can create a culture is if leaders hold themselves accountable to what it is that we're trying to create. All right, Dr. Dotun, are you on?
Yes,
Okay, you can.
but I won't be sharing slide.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
We were just waiting for you to come on.
Okay, man. Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are coming from. My name is Dotun, and I'm very glad to be thinking on this important as we look at the Confederation of Human Resource Practitioners across various parts of Africa, from the north, central, east, west, and southern part of Africa. This is monumental and is of importance, but as we look at the global trend and in the corporate world, in particular as we enthrone the best practices of HR in Africa. It is clearly understood that Africa has peculiarities, and it is important to enthrone the best way upon which HR practices can be practiced in order to strengthen organizational performances. Some time ago, I was involved in a research, and the research was in Italy. The objective of this research was to understand how many indigenous companies and corporations in Africa have been able to survive the last 100 years of existence. So I began by comparing corporations or multinationals in the West. I look at Cadbury, I look at Nestle, I look at Heineken, and other companies in the West. And I've seen that some of them have lived for 200 years. In 250 years, like Guinness of 1759. And then I saw Coca-Cola too. Then I come back home to Africa. I started with my country, Nigeria, and I was looking for indigenous companies that have survived the last 100 years. But in my quest, and in the course of looking for, I couldn't find up to 2 indigenous corporations that have survived 100 years of existence in Nigeria. And then I wanted to go further to know why. Does it mean we cannot build indigenous firms? Does it mean we have not had corporations in the past? Does it mean Africa is not ripe enough to build own corporations that will survive centuries? So I began to dig deep to find out why the sudden collapse. So I saw those that have existed for 20 years and afterward they don't exist again. 30 years, 25 years, 15 years, 22 years, 23 years. And then I began to dig further. Why? What led to the sudden death of once upon a time corporations, indigenous firms in Africa or in Nigeria that have gone into extinction? In my findings, I came across something very important and significant. And that is what we call absence of organizational development. And therefore, this Pan-African HR conference, transforming HR practices for the future of Africa, is therefore necessary to consider the critical roles HR must play if we are going to have corporations that can take care of African populations, that can take care of our people, that can provide job opportunities, decent living for as many people that live in Africa. Then the topic, aligning HR to OD interventions for corporate success. What is OD and what are these interventions? And why do we need to pitch HR with OD? It is important to say something critical at this point in time. And what is that? In this exercise, we shall quickly look at the purpose of an organization. Why does an organization exist? And then we need to appreciate the global corporation disruption necessitating impetuous innovations and creativity for Africa. Furthermore, we shall look at the life cycle of an organization and the need to respond to continuous growth and development. We also appreciate OD in corporate success, redefine the roles of HR in OD, importance of OD, and then aligning HR with this. Let me quickly mention that why do organizations exist? The first question that will come to mind is the purpose of an organization. About a year ago, over 250 CEOs in the United States gathered together to redefine the purpose of a corporation. And about over 180 of them redefined corporation to say a corporation exists not just to maximize the shareholders' wealth, but the stakeholders' wealth. There was a marginal shift from shareholders to stakeholders. And if you look at the Davos Summit in 2020, early 2020, the Davos Summit suggests and recommends that stakeholders are who? Investors who have put down their capital. The customers who are the recipients of the value of the corporations. The employees who stand at the vertex between the investor, the owner, and the customer. So they serve and deliver the value of the customer. Then you have the government. Without the government providing the license to operate, an institution or a corporation may not be able to exist. And then you have the community, the society, where the organization, the corporation, takes people from. So as we redefine that all these stakeholders have interest in the purpose of the organization or corporation or institution, whether profit making or service provider, they have interest. Employees have interest. Investors have interest. Customers have interest. And then the society, the community, or the social responsibility also are critical. So when we come to understand that these stakeholders are critical to the existence of any corporate organizations, then we begin to understand that, okay, so if these stakeholders have interest and they want their interest to be maximized, investors want it maximized, customers want interest to be maximized, employees want interest to be maximized, the government wants interest to be maximized, the community also want impact, inputs from the corporation. If that is the case, then we need now to redefine why do we need OD to serve and deliver these stakeholders' expectations. What is OD? Now, the perfect analogy I use here is a human being. A human being is made up of quite a number of components. And if you look at a typical human being, the question I'm going to ask is, which of these human parts is less desirable? Or which of these human parts you think we can remove? And the person will still remain a normal, a complete human being. Shall we remove the heart? No. Shall we remove the eyes? Okay, no. Shall we remove the feet? How about the hands? How about the lungs and the kidney, because they are not visible? But they're there. The kidney doesn't need to be visible for human being to function, but it's there. The liver is not visible, but it's there. So as you look at the completion of human existence or human being, made up of the physiological parts and the anatomical parts, every component of the human being represents a significant value. And if you disintegrate, if you eliminate or you play down any part of the human being, then you will say such a person is challenged. Such a person is not complete because something is missing. That is what OD means. The entire human being is an organization. And for this organization, this human being, every part must be developed. What is the import for an organization? If you develop customer service and you abandon marketing, that is not development. If you develop human resource department, well manned with competent professional HR department and people, and you have issues with quality control, that's not development. If you have a good quality control system and your production system or your relationship management system or your finance system or your control system is suboptimal, that is not development. Why? Because any part of human being that suffers illness will affect the completion of the entire human being. An headache, a stomach ache, the pain in the eye, the pain in here will affect the wholesomeness of a whole human being. That is the same meaning and the import of OD. Every part of the human being must be active, functional, normal, healthy, to be able to say we are developing. We are growing. Therefore, the call of OD is a multidisciplinary function. It cuts across the entire system. And it looks at the entire system. And it reflects on the entire system. Whether it is leadership, whether it is human resource, whether it is team building, whether it is strategic thinking, whether it is system thinking, whether it is talent management, whether it is governance, corporate governance, whether it is internal, the completion, the entirety that reflects on people, and process, and policies, and practices, and tools, and structures. Therefore, the expectations of OD is to make up a wholesome organization, totality, completeness of an organization. Therefore, how does it affect HR? When any part of the organization is suboptimal, HR is not working. When I say HR, I am not referring to HR as a department. I'm not referring to HR as a person. Maybe you are the head of the department, but I'm referring to the people management process has issue. And wherever the person is, account, control, customer service, quality, production, processes, wherever, as long as such I want is a human being, then the company, the corporation, the institution, the business, the empire has not attained the desired maximization of performance. Do not forget, as I mentioned earlier, that quite a number of corporations have died. In a recent research in Nigeria, between 1980 to 2000, the Corporate Affairs Commission recorded over 50,000 companies to have gone into extinction. They couldn't survive. Yet we have competent HR people, experienced HR people, people with a lot of certifications, PhD in HR, MBA in HR, GPHR, SPHR. But how do you confirm our competencies if it cannot be seen in the entire system? The HR person is not bad, but there is no development in the entire organization. That is why we see corporations celebrating 20 years, 15 years successes, and after a while we can't find them again. They go into outright extinction. Why? Because OD beckons on totality, developing the entire system of the organization, circle of an organization. There's birth. Just as we give birth to a normal human being too, corporations are birth. And as they're birth, they're growing. Record shows that 75% of businesses in Nigeria, in Africa, are SMEs, small medium. So they represent the largest percentage of employment for people in Africa. The remaining are just about 25%. So if these SMEs are not strengthening, if they're not growing, then there's threat to employment in Africa. There's threat to social being in Africa. There's threat to security in Africa. Because when there's no employment, when there's no job opportunities, then there are threats to livelihood. Therefore, it is imperative that we develop cooperation from birth. Then growth. Records show further that most SMEs die within the first 10 years. More than 70% die. They don't survive the first 10 years. But if they survive, then growth begins. As they grow, they experience challenges. They change and restructure. They design, they redesign. They restructure and reposition themselves. And then maturity. Having experienced certain challenges. So at maturity, it's not enough to celebrate. Yes, we have made some milestones, but as corporations, as businesses, as NGOs or profit making, we still need to go further. Otherwise, decline will set in. In his words, Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fall, he made mention of 3 things that can happen to decline. He said, decline can be avoided. Corporations, businesses that constantly reposition themselves will quickly dictate decline, or they can avoid it because they are constantly re-engineering and repositioning. In the world of Jack Welch, he said, companies that make best practices their priority. So their priority is best practices. Best practices across all businesses, across all functions, across all portfolios. He says they make it a priority. So such corporations will thrive. And they are thirsty. They don't say we are there. No. We are not than 50 years in existence, 30 years in existence, 70 years in existence. So where are our corporations going to be in the next 100 years? He says no, that these corporations are always thirsty. They are learning organizations, not learning departments, not just learning individuals, they are learning organizations. So there is a knowledge-driven system. And that was why we examine culture. Because culture is the critical component of any surviving organization. The Harvard Business Review research, another research from by Bain, shows that 75% of corporations survive and succeed and sustain as a result of disciplined culture. So a suboptimal culture will certainly lead to a defeated corporations. Thanks to Anne and Eddie for sharing and expanding on the imperativeness and the necessity of culture in driving a 21st century corporations in this fourth year revolution. He says they are learning. They believe that everyone, you can see holding, everyone, HR, finance, internal control, risk management, compliance, customer service, marketing, business development, GMs, executives, CEOs, security, front desk, everyone should always be searching for a better way of improving process, better way of serving customers, better way of delivering the value of the stakeholders. So those kind of companies are filled with energy and curiosity and a spirit of can do. So back again to the existence of corporations. And then that leads us to revival. We revive. Because if we don't take care of a decline, it's a decline can be avoided. Decline can be dictated if we mistakenly, we didn't take notice of certain practices our system becomes suboptimal and decline begin to set in. Decline begin to set in from the top. And then you see the corporation begins to go down little by little. Then decline can be reversed. Corporations that have allowed decline to set in can reverse it. But if they fail to reverse decline, death. I see. We have so many corporations. They started in the 90s, in the 80s, indigenous firms. They died with the owners. They died with the founding fathers. We can't find them again. But if we're able to come up, and that's why we're looking at this theme in Africa, that through the human capital management, we can revive. We can position our organizations as agents of change. We can bring in expected changes that will transform corporations in Africa, in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Togo, in South Africa, in Ghana, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in any part of Africa. We can make Africa the hub and not a dumping ground, because we want to set in the motion of revival. Recently, Professor Dave Orish, my great mentor, did a research that covered 12 well-studied capabilities. Now, what individuals have is competencies or capacity. Now, the collection of all of us, HR, finance, control, admin, marketing, business development, research and development, quality control, and all of such, when you bring all of our skills together, it gives or represents corporate capabilities. That is all we can do. That is what we measure. So, in other words, organizational capabilities is the average score of the entire system. So, if you have a performing HR manager and a poorly performing production manager, so it is a 9 plus 1, that's 10, divide by 2, it gives you a 5. So it means a non-performing person diminishes and brings down the value of high-performing person. Therefore, all this says, if you want to drive a system, if the HR department, HR professionals will drive functional, active, growing, performing corporations, then let's look at these 12 capabilities. One, it says in the current dispensation, if Africa will truly express total liberation, if the corporations and SMEs and indigenous firms in Africa will truly experience growth, as we experience in Coca-Cola, in Guinness, in Cadbury, in Google, in Facebook, in all the corporations in the West, same can be backed in Africa, and Africa corporation can become a case studies in Harvard, more of them. Then we have to look at talent. We must examine the competencies, the skills level of people that are armed in our organizations. We must take time and carefully ensure that we cannot plead down on selection, agility, ability to respond to things quickly and faster. So HR must drive agility across the system. How our processes run, how our procedures run. How often do we respond to changes and challenges within the scope of the organizations, externally and within? How often do we manage issues within the organization as HR? Agility is able to respond to customers' issues quickly and faster and respond to the pressure of competition and disruption, whether profit making or services. Strategic clarity. The cleaners, the office assistants, the insignificant people must understand what we want to achieve for the year 2021 and 2022 and 2020. They don't say, I don't know why I'm here. I'm just a cleaner, just a driver. No. You are not just a driver. You are driving the CEOs for something important. You are not just a cleaner. You are preparing people that want to take critical decisions in the boardroom. No, you are not just an office assistant. You are supporting the corporations to make headway. You are not just a front desk. You are welcoming people, putting smile and telling them that this is the right corporations to be. Right culture. You see, culture, Eddie and Anne have already dealt with culture. A suboptimal culture is an invite to a dying corporation. No matter how big, how beautiful, how medially publicized the corporation is. If the culture is affected, then the system is going down. Collaboration. It is not about mine. The whole D concept is not to celebrate individuals. It's not to celebrate a department. It's to celebrate a winning system. We are not competing. We are complementary. We are consolidating one another. And that's social responsibility. Then the next one is innovations. Our ability to respond to the dynamics and to the trending of the investors' expectations, the customers' expectations, the employees' expectations, the society's expectations, and the government's expectations. Organizations that fail to respond, they are actually waiting to be extincted. I read the article where the CEO of Nokia was handing over Nokia to the new owner, and the CEO wept and he cried, and he said something very important statement. He said, "What have we done wrong?" He said, "We have done nothing wrong." Yes, Nokia didn't do anything wrong. Neither did they do anything right. Innovations is the next thing. We can give our market to China. We can give our market to the Europe. We can give our market to anywhere. We must take back Africa. And that begins by birthing people who have the innovative skills, innovative managers, innovative customer service, innovative marketing, innovative HR, innovative financial department, innovation control, innovation every nook and cranny of our businesses. Until that happens, HR has no rest. Efficiency, making things happen and happen faster, making things happen and happen better. Accountability, ability to deliver value transparently, and then information and analysis. After me is fast sprint. Well, 5 major OD interventions I want to talk about. Having gone through quite a number of OD interventions, I chose to choose these 5 because these 5 was researched by an African person, Dr. Malan Cornell. She's also here. And then these 5 AOD interventions focused on African peculiarities, because Africa is a continent on its own, with its own distinct practices and uniqueness, geographically different. And everything is also different, language and everything wise. And therefore, these 5 OD blueprints carefully examines how HR should respond to the OD issues. In the course of my research, we've seen HR saying, "No, this is not my department, I'm just HR." No, you are not just HR. You are co-creating value with the corporations. If the corporation is successful, HR is successful. If it's failing, then HR is failing. It is not about me. It's not about my certifications. It's about delivering value to the organization. Therefore, what is the role of HR? Delivering external value inside out. When we develop competency inside, is to deliver value outside. So the value is defined more by the receiver outside than the giver. So let's see these 5 competencies that HR should look at as interventions for HR as part of OD focus. 1, HR leaders in Africa. HR leaders across the continent of Africa must be future-proof by talent management. So it is not enough to say we have talents. Rather, we have talents that are future sensitive. I mean, talent that can respond to the possibilities of the future expectations. Talent that understands that we are going to compete with the West, and we're going to compete with China, and we're going to compete with India, and we're going to compete with Germany, and we're going to compete with the United Kingdom, and we're going to compete with the Canadians, and we're going to compete with the United States of America, and Russia, and Vietnam, and Indonesia, and Japan. Therefore, HR begins to x-ray which talents are required to compete for the future. We've talked about the future of work, but now this is the future. HR must embrace the OD intervention that focus on analyzing the future digitalizations. Therefore, almost every operational function of HR are outsourced. So organizations don't need HR that focuses on operational activities. They need HR that can see how do we appreciate the analytics as a representation of HR index and decisions. How can we represent HR practices in digital that best scores or underscores the expectations of the stakeholders? HR must respond to being a steward of governance and ethics. As the legal system begins to revolutionize, corporations have been webbed up in quite a number of issues, and one of such issues is compliance and ethics. Are we working ethically as a corporation now? Are we working ethically as a system? Are we violating fundamental human issues? As I speak with you, there's a serious protest in Nigeria for the past 1 week now that SARS, one of the arms of the Nigerian police, should be scrapped. Why? Because there were a lot of issues that borders on governance and ethics. We lost one of the biggest banks in Nigeria some few years ago, about 2 years ago. And the bank is Diamond Bank. And that bank was the pioneer of SME banking in Nigeria, and one of the banks to be reckoned with in Nigeria. But so unfortunate that the bank, having stood for about 20 years and has recorded high level of successes and a pride to be reckoned with, but overnight, Diamond Bank, almighty Diamond Bank, was swallowed by an insignificant bank that cannot stand that bank face to face. Why? There were gross governance malpractices. The son of the founder, who happened to be the CEO, committed a lot of governance errors. And then the bank began to collapse, began to close branches outside Nigeria, began to declare losses, and eventually the bank was dead. How do we strengthen governance system that we don't collapse corporations and organizations in Africa? Many of our people have run away from Africa because we have collapsed so many corporations and there are no businesses in Africa. Most of the SMEs are dying because they have collapsed governance system and ethical issues have been grossly violated. But when we put on Africa in the right perspective and we embrace this, then we will be able to put on and put in the best practices through governance system, through ethical system, by rigging of corruptions in corporate practices, by ensuring that leaders and managers preach and speak and practice what they do, by ensuring that corporations are transparent to Africans and to Africa, and by ensuring that everything in Africa, everything we are doing in Africa is toward the advancement of one another in Africa. By so doing, we will have Africa free of terrorism, free of militants, free of vices, free of crimes. So when we begin to talk about crimes, HR has a role to play. Because when corporations are rendering equitable services to the corporations, communities, society, employees, investors, customers, there'll be less issues, there'll be less frictions, there'll be less problems, there'll be less distraction, and Africa will become a better planet. And then the last but not the least is high performance. So I asked HR, I said, are you a high performing HR? Beyond your certifications, beyond the number of years of experience you have you learned and relearned? Have you unlearned things that have no value, things that do not support corporate practices? Or you bat your time and energy in things that will not deliver value to the corporations? But when HR people, leading HR people, competent HR people begins to value high performance, not excuse, but high performance, that is behavioral economists. If you check through the LinkedIn, you will see a lot of accusation against HR. HR are mean. HR don't have time for candidates. They ask insultive questions. They frustrate employees. They assume to be gods. HR must be carrier of decency. characters, behaviors, contentment, modesty, courtesy, respect for humanity, because we are managing the most complex organ, we are managing the most complex resource, people management. Therefore, HR people must be custodian of behavior that had values. HR must be strategic planner. HR must understand finance and fiscal fitness, the language of operations, and speak the language of business. So when HR sits in the mahogany of boardroom, he or she speaks as a businessman. He doesn't speak as an operational person. He speaks as a CEO. He speaks as one who is well deepened in operational excellence. HR speaks as the voice of the organization. And HR speaks as the voice of humanity, because HR understands the purpose of planning. So when HR is seeing the CEO, HR is speaking from the business growth and the business declines and its business impact. So every decision of HR is impact driven. That's a strategy. HR had value. HR is not a cost, but value. People are not cost, but value. And finally, HR audits. Constantly, consistently, every time, HR overhaul the system and try to fight against the tendency of mediocrity, where we celebrate mediocrity, where we promote laziness, where we keep on rolling performance management system as a ritual. HR fights such. HR looks at the CEO eyeball to eyeball and says, this is the direction we are going. HR understands the language of CEO. In fact, in his article, that which he said, HR must be OCD, organizational compulsive disorder. That is, HR is always looking for the best ways to manage the corporations, the best way to drive the corporation, the best way to put the corporation in the best position. Before I round up, if we embrace all the interventions, what are the benefits? If we look beyond the rudiment of HR practicing and we begin to portray it and put our eyes on other activities that affect the corporations, what are the... There's continuous improvements. We want African corporations to continue to rise, to move from being dwindling and dying, to succeed and to sustain the success. We don't want 20 years success, 30 years success, but we want to see African indigenous firms rising to 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. We want to see people coming back and saying, I'm going back to Africa. There's job for me in Africa. There are opportunities for me in Africa. Africa is building its own automobile. Africa is building its own satellite. Africa is doing this. There'll be continuous improvements. 2, there will be increased communication. Why? Because in driving system thinking, it is not just about HR. Jacques said HR is not about HR. That is, HR exists to support, to drive, to strengthen, to consolidate. So HR is to serve everybody in the corporation until we are able to drive success. HR has no rest. So communication from HR helps everybody to understand that this is the direction we are going. And then there'll be employee development. We are developing people one at a time. We develop them in various departments. We develop leaders, we train employees, we strengthen them, we mentor them, we coach them, we design them, we brainstorm, we share knowledge, we move the corporation to high level of successes, and not dwindling, and not dying, and not closing up. And finally, there'll be increased value. As an NGO, there'll be increased value. As a profit making, there'll be increased value. When there's profitability, we can pay well, we can retain. And then we can take care of our investors too. The customers are satisfied. They say, keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. They are retained and they are multiplied. And the society, we are impacting society. We are feeding the poor. We are sponsoring people on scholarships. And then our youths don't become agents of political thuggery again, or militants, because they are being supported by profit-making, growing corporations. I want to conclude with this thought by Peter Drucker.
No problem.
As we emerge or re-emerge, as we rebirth HR practices in Africa, as we put Africa in the limelight of growth and globalization, it is important to note that neither the corporate, that is private or public sector.
Yeah, for
Or
me, it's
Superman,
important to know
or
what
lion
you're
tamers,
what
or
you're doing for
efficient
free,
performance. Our
and who's
establishment,
in the room.
our farms,
Oh,
our banks,
okay.
our tech company, our
Yes.
automobile, our
Yes.
ministries, our federal agencies
Yes.
must continue to be staffed
Mm.
by ordinary
Okay.
men, ordinary women, normal human beings, or
Okay.
even fairly low endowment, provided that such people,
Okay.
such HR leaders,
Okay.
such corporate leaders, such line manager and
Okay.
C-suite are men prepared to learn
Okay.
and to persevere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dotun. That was a powerful presentation. And thank you so much for bringing out the intervention clearly and the benefits of OD. This time I'll just check and find out if there's some questions. We don't have any questions for now in our question and answer segment from the participants. Maybe let me just give them time to actually just ask some questions. Even as we allow Anne to just give your closing remarks. We are running out of time. We're waiting for people to ask questions. I'll also do ask some questions at the end, but I just want to give the participants an opportunity to ask some questions and also just give you a 1 minute allocation to just conclude and try and see how you can just concretize everything that has been discussed in this session.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Anne, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, please. Just under a minute, under 2 minutes, because we're already running out of time. So under 2 minutes, just try and give your concluding remarks. Of course, looking at what both presenters have talked about, and just see how this can be highlighted, and also how you can highlight one or two things that have been discussed, and also just give an overview of our whole topic.
Okay, so I think just first of all, thanks so much for having me here. Just in terms of concluding, I think that the things that are coming through from all the different presentations are, first of all, the importance of just inclusion and making sure that all your employees are participating and lending their voice to the way the organization culture develops. I think something else that has really been repeated often is around the importance of HR leaders thinking of themselves as business leaders and focusing on building culture very deliberately, all the way from the way they attract talent to the way you exit people. So then, and then the other thing that has really stood out for me is around leadership and modeling, the importance of leaders modeling the right kind of behaviors, behaviors that you have identified and that you have tried to embed or worked to embed within your team, but for the leaders to remember that they really are, that culture will be their shadow. And it is for them to model the right kind of behaviors or the behaviors that they would like to see within the organization, to be able to be coaching and mentoring people around those behaviors so that they make sure that they are reinforcing the kind of culture that will lead the organization to execute the strategy that they have in place. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. And it's been a privilege to share the stage with you, Eddie and Dotun.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, so any of you can pick up this question. We have a question to say, what's the best way to align culture with business strategy? What's the best way to align culture with business strategy?
And maybe you want to try and answer that question first. I think your presentation was most linked to organizational culture and strategy. I'm happy to to chip in after you've given your?
Yeah, I did. I think when during my presentation, I highlighted some of the things we've learned. But I think probably to answer that question, the first step is, of course, to identify the values that you want to the values that you want to guide the behaviors of your organization, whether it is from your strategy, around your people, and around the brand that you're representing and the results that you want to achieve, and the importance of really not just thinking about it from a point of what your shareholders want to receive as value, but also what your community and your employees and customers need, what you need to be able to deliver for them. So I think for me, that's the most important thing around aligning culture to or creating a culture of execution, which is really identifying the values that you derive from the 4 areas that I highlighted, so that you make sure that you're being consistent with your actions, because at the end of the day, culture is built on organizational trust, and trust is built on consistency, on delivering what you said you would deliver, the way you said you would deliver it. And so that for me is the most important thing, alongside the other things that I spoke to around inclusion and focus on purpose and so on.
That's great. Meaning when the trust is lost, means you can't deliver, you can't achieve actually. Yeah. Eddie, you want to chip in? We just have like less than 5 minutes for us to be concluding this session. So we just quickly chip in, and as you chip in, please make your concluding remarks as well, so that we conclude on time.
Okay, great, thank you. First of all, let me just reach out to Anne and Dr. Dotun as well. Thank you for your fantastic presentations. I've learned an incredible amount from you guys today. It's been an incredible honor for me to be in your company and to learn from you. And wishing you guys well. I think it's been a great experience for me, and hopefully it's been a session that has demonstrated some value to our participants, because I think that's what it's all about. In terms of the question, for me, in my experience, probably one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make in terms of strategy is that we come out of a strategy session and we have too many goals to focus on. We have too many priorities, and it's very difficult to link organizational culture to strategy when we have too much to focus on. The law of diminishing returns says that if we're going to focus on more than 10 goals, we are likely to achieve nothing. If you focus on 4 to 10 goals, you're lucky if you're going to achieve 1. And so, my suggestion would be for organizations that are linking their organizational culture with their strategy is, in terms of strategy, we've got to be really, really, careful that we are highlighting what our highest priorities are. In other words, what are our wildly important goals? And there should be no more than 3 of them. I don't believe that it's possible for an organization to achieve 3 wildly important goals with excellence, and to get every single person in the organization wildly focused, or laser focused rather, on achieving on our highest priorities. So I think the question that we can ask as leaders is, if all of our performance measures, all of our performance results had to stay exactly the same during the course of the next year, what is the one single thing that's going to have the greatest possible impact in our business? I'm going to repeat the question. If all of our performance results had to stay exactly the same during the course of the next year, what is the one single thing that's going to have the greatest possible impact in our organization? And then align the behaviors or the keystone habits or values in our organization with achieving that wildly important goal, whether it be to increase net promoter score, which is customer loyalty, or whether it's to, whatever it is. I think focus is key. Don't try and, focus on achieving 15 goals, because we're not likely to achieve anything. If we think about the last initiative,
I'll have to cut you there. We're running out of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Dr. Dotun, you can just go ahead and give your closing remarks, and also if you can just highlight on the question that has been asked.
Okay, once again, thank you very. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hedy. I so much like the slide, even though I was struggling, but I met towards the tail, and I was actually blessed. Thank you very much for such insightful presentations, and it's a real learning for me too as a person. I want to thank Madam Anne for such a wonderful presentation, even though I couldn't, get all, but the one I got actually benefited a whole lot, and then particularly your exposure on aligning culture with strategy is critical because you mentioned it very well that you need to speak to your values because your values is where your culture is coming from. And when you have issue with your value, then you are like going to have a suboptimal culture or poorly worded culture. So you have to go back again and check out if your value is actually speaking to your direction. Now, one of the challenges oftentimes, just as Mr. Eddie said, is that we come out of strategic session essays and we have so many things we want to achieve. And unfortunately, it is very important to know that you cannot achieve all this because some of them are conflicting and some of them are coming from quite a number of arenas. But when you can define one thing that stands you out, I think that will help you to be able to connect your culture with your strategy. Let me add this, that it is important to know that your strategy, the question is, which one speaks volume? Is it your strategy or your culture? Now, do not forget that even your strategy is a product of your culture. Now, your culture is how do you deliver this? So when you are couching your strategy, consider the elements in your culture. If this will align with it. But if your strategy is anti your culture, you will successfully couch it, but you will fail to execute or to realize it. Therefore, the two must go hand in hand. Therefore, you can re-evaluate or you can carry out a culture audit to identify the current position of your culture. If your culture is actually driving your strategy or if your strategy is driving your culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I must commend you all. You explained your topics with a lot of clarity, and I must confess that's why we don't have questions because it was very clear. You addressed all the issues that needed to be addressed, and thank you very much. And we have learned a lot. We are very grateful. Thank you for making time to be speakers on this session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
And can we also take the opportunity,
Thank
can we take the opportunity to thank you as well? Thank you very much for moderating the session. I think you've done a really professional job and you've kept things together really nicely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the support for me. Thank you for not leaving me alone. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Good day.
All right. All the best, everybody. Take care. Cheerio.
Mr. Thank you.
With you later. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.